Hey, Carrey. Good morning. This is Pastor Chris, and I have the privilege of sharing with you today's message. Now, we are continuing our series that we started a few weeks ago called 1KC. And this is a movement that we're doing with other churches here in Kansas City, where on Sunday mornings, we are all teaching on the same passages. And the passages are all from the book of John, and they're all the times in the book of John that Jesus says, I am, and then fill in the blank with whatever Jesus says. And somehow, when we were dividing up all the weeks, Dan got the first two, which is, I am the bread of life, and I am the light of the world. Now, in the preaching realm, we call those softballs. Like, you cannot mess those up. Who doesn't love bread? And who in the world doesn't get the imagery of light? Like Jesus, Dan literally stood on the stage last week with a light. A light. It was that easy. And so Dan gets these two super awesome, super easy to grasp and understand images of bread and light. And then I get my week here and I dive in, and you want to know what it is? It's Jesus saying, I am, wait for it, the gate. Yeah, the gate. I am the gate. What am I supposed to do with that? Who loves gates? Not the barbecue place, but like a literal gate. Who gets excited about that? If you're anything like me, the images that pop into my head when I think about gates are not positive images. You know what I think about? I think about the Kansas City airport and the fact that whoever designed it put a Starbucks outside of the security gate, like right outside of it. But if you actually go to that Starbucks and buy yourself an overpriced coffee that you can sit and drink while you wait for your plane to be ready, once you try to get through the security gate, they will inform you that you cannot take liquids in and they will take your drink from you. That's the image that pops into my mind when I think about gates. And yet, I'm supposed to do a message this week on how Jesus is the gate. I guess the best place for us to start is the Bible. And so we're going to be taking a look at John chapter 10. So if you're following along at home, you want to grab your Bible, it's John chapter 10, or if you click on the notes tab, I've got a link to it there. But I would love for you guys to follow along with me. I think it makes it a little easier to actually see what I'm talking about. But while we're talking about John 10, I want to give you a little background of John 9. Now, John 9 contains one of the miracles of Jesus. It's when Jesus heals a man that was born blind. And then the man goes into the synagogue and he's talking to the Pharisees there, and there's this kind of conflict, and they don't actually believe that this miracle happened or that it was a good thing that it happened, and that actually ends with the Pharisees throwing him out of the synagogue. Now, I realize there's a couple words there that are kind of foreign to us today. We don't use them all that common, Pharisee and synagogue. So let me put it into a little more modern language. Now, see, when we say Pharisee, we often use that as an insult. In the church world, we sometimes call somebody a Pharisee if they're a little too stuck on the rules or attached to the details of things. So for us, it's kind of a negative vibe to it. But back then, the Pharisees were like the pastors. There were about 6,000 of them spread across the land, and they were well-respected individuals. When you wanted to find advice on how to follow the law or how to get closer to God, you found a Pharisee. And the synagogue, that was their common place of worship. Of course, you had the big temple, but you also had these meeting places called synagogues that really kind of function like churches do today. So in modern lingo, this guy gets thrown out of the church by a pastor. And Jesus hears about what happens at the end of chapter 9, and he goes and finds this man, and he asks him, do you believe in me? And he says, yeah. But then the Pharisees overhear this, and they want to know kind of what's going on. And so Jesus says to this man, he says, I entered this world to render judgment, to give sight to the blind, and to show those who think they see that they are blind. And the Pharisees could feel the tension in the air. They realized that Jesus was referring to them. And so some of the Pharisees who were standing nearby heard and asked Jesus, are you saying that we're blind? And then Jesus replies, if you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty. But you remain guilty because you claim to see. In other words, it's not that you don't know what you're talking about. It's that you don't know what you're talking about, but you claim to know what you're talking about. And so Jesus saying that to this group, this gets everyone's attention. This would be like you taking, I don't know, the CEO, the top person at your company, pulling them aside and then yelling out for everybody to hear, you don't know what you're talking about. And the biggest problem is you tell all of us that you know what you're talking about. Well, you can imagine that would play out in a very interesting way. And that's what's happening here as Jesus begins to use this language of gate. And you're going to see that Jesus actually refers to gate as kind of a person, which at first that might seem a little odd, but I want you to think about your own life. Think about somebody that opened a door for you, that gave you a new opportunity. I think back to my very first day of high school. And like any freshman, I was scared, didn't know what I was doing. And I was pretty much lost all day. And I remember at one point I was trying to find my biology class. And I was looking frantically for it. And in the hall was the cross-country coach. And he looks at me and he says, hey, Chris, you should run. Well, I thought he meant to class, so I took off booking it down the hall. But he grabbed me after class and he said, no. I meant on the cross-country team. He asked me to be on their team. Now, I remember I couldn't let go of that. And eventually I did join the team. I also eventually found out that he was asking everybody that just because they wanted to have enough people to have a JV and a varsity squad. But at the time, it felt like a door being opened, a new opportunity being given to me. One, that's taken me a lot of places. It's actually given me the opportunity to travel around the world with Team World Vision. It's connected me to you guys. And it all happened because of that one person that opened that one door, that gave me that one opportunity. Maybe you have somebody like that in your life. If you want, you could throw their name in the chat right now. Now, sadly, sometimes this isn't always a positive thing. You know, if you ever hear anybody talking about their story, their downfall, maybe their fall into addiction, a lot of times you'll hear that it all happened when they met this one person, this one acquaintance that opened a door to a world of possibilities that weren't good, that set them on the wrong path. But this is the kind of imagery that we're going to use today. When I say gate, it's not like the physical gate that you're going to go buy at Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever people buy gates. I literally don't know. No, but I'm talking about a person. In fact, let's dive into this passage here. John 10 begins like this. I tell you the truth, anyone who sneaks over the wall of a sheepfold rather than going through the gate must surely be a thief or a robber. But the one who enters through the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep recognize his voice and come to him. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. After he's gathered his own flock, he walks ahead of them, and they follow him because they know his voice. They won't follow a stranger. They will run from him because they don't know his voice. So to understand this passage, one of the things that we need to do is we need to take a look at what it looked like to be a shepherd in first century Palestine. And there were different kind of shepherds. There were some that the sheep, they were out into the fields during the day, but they actually went back into the village and into a waiting area there during the night. But what we're talking about here, what Jesus is referring to, are these shepherds kind of out in big open fields. And they keep the sheep in the fields at night in these kind of little structures. And there are these walls that go around, and there's one opening in them. The walls aren't super high. They're about waist high, but they have like spikes and thorns on top so the sheep don't try to go over them. But there's only one entrance, only one place that you could go in or out. And the shepherd, if he was to stay all night with the sheep, or the gatekeeper, if the shepherd was going to go home and get some rest, they would bring out a gatekeeper or a watchman. They would literally sleep in that entrance. They would lay down and they would sleep there, and the sheep wouldn't leave. See, sheep aren't the smartest of animals. In fact, I've shown this clip before, but I'm going to show it again because I absolutely love it. Sheep are known for getting themselves stuck and in trouble like this.
Ой, умничка, Риад, умничка. Ногу не сломай только ему. Умничка, умничка. За обе ноги. Молодец, Риад, умничка. Умничка. Все, операция удалась. Дурак!
Yeah, I love that clip. I think there's a reason that Jesus calls us his sheep, because sometimes we're like that. Sheep aren't always the smartest, and so they literally wouldn't leave if the gatekeeper or the shepherd was acting as the gate. And then what would happen is that the shepherd would come back, and the gatekeeper would only get up if it was their shepherd, and then he would get up and the shepherd would lead the sheep out. And I love how it says that the sheep know his voice. We're going to talk more about Jesus as a shepherd next week, so I don't want to dive too far into that. But it's actually true that flocks know the voice of their shepherd. I was actually reading in one commentary that, even today this is true of sheep, and you can have two sheep flocks that have intermingled in a field, and the two shepherds can stand on opposite sides, and shouting out in their voice, using their call, the sheep know who their shepherd is, and they will they will separate into the two separate flocks. I kind of love that image. It says that when the shepherd gets there, the sheep will follow him out. And then it goes on, and it says here in verse 6, those who heard Jesus using this illustration didn't understand what he meant, so he explained it to them. I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me were thieves and robbers, but the true sheep did not listen to them. Yes, I am the gate. Those who come in through me will be saved. They will come and go freely and will find good pastures. The thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy. My purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. Or some translations say, life and life abundant. Or one translation says, life to the fullest. And who doesn't want that? See, I want to stop and I want to focus on the end of this for just a second there. This idea of salvation that Jesus is offering them. This idea of a rich and satisfying life, an abundant life. Yeah, that word, as I studied it, it doesn't fully capture it for us. We don't use the word abundant a lot. It's not as heavy as it would have been for them. A better word would be epic. That Jesus wants to give us an epic life. Or one commentator said that you could almost translate this as God-quality life. That God wants to give us an epic life, a God-quality life. I grew up in a pretty conservative Southern Baptist environment. And there's some fundamentalism that seeps into that. And I only mention that because I still see it in a lot of evangelical churches today, where a lot of the faith just gets boiled down to the afterlife. All Christianity is about is whether you're going to go to heaven or you're going to go to hell. And then salvation simply means having your ticket to heaven. If you're saved, you have the ticket to heaven. If you're not saved, you don't, and therefore you're going to go to hell. And that's what Christianity is. But this passage, well, Jesus in general presents a very different understanding of it. In fact, in another story, he's asked about this idea of eternal life, and he uses a phrase there that can be translated as the one with God, harmony with the Lord, to become one with your Creator. It's not just about where we go when we die. It's about the here and the now, having a rich and satisfying life, an abundant life, life to the full, an epic life, a God-quality life. And I don't know about you, but I want that. And this passage, this message is all about how to get that. How do we get that kind of life? And, the Pharisees, I think one of the reasons that Jesus is telling this to them is they thought they had figured out how to get it. See, they thought it was the law that God had given them in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, sometimes called the Torah, the 613 commandments. See, they believed that by obeying those, they would get closer to God and experience epic God-quality life. They thought that was the way to get there. And it might be easy to judge them now for that. But we're still doing that. We're still searching for how to achieve this. Because we all want this, Christian or not, we all want to experience a rich and satisfying life, and we're all trying to figure out how to get it. I ended up watching a documentary this past week. I don't even know how I ended up watching this, but it was a 4-part series on Amazon Prime on the company LuLaRoe. And this is a company that makes tights, like tights you wear with crazy patterns on them. And it ended up being a pyramid scheme, multi-level marketing that had a lot of kind of shady practices to it. And even some cult-like stuff going on. It was a little crazy. But in this documentary, they were interviewing all these different women that had gotten involved with it. And so many of their stories sounded the same. They were stay-at-home moms, or they were looking for extra income. They wanted to add something more to their life to make it more fulfilling. And this opportunity came along to open their own business, and so they did, and many of them were really successful at it. And then eventually they got to a point where it started to feel hollow, like something wasn't right. And it wasn't. And eventually the whole thing crumbled down. And it was heartbreaking to hear these stories of these women that ended up losing so much. And I don't say this to call them out, because the truth is so much of what we see in our culture is based on the same idea of having a more fulfilling life. That's what every gym membership is. That's what every commercial is trying to sell us. We live in a culture that is constantly telling us, if you get this, if you go through that door, if you have that opportunity, then you're going to be fulfilled. Then it's going to be rich and satisfying. But what you find is that time and time again, you get there. You go through the door, you take the opportunity, and it's not what you thought it was going to be. Here's this great quote from Jim Carrey, the actor. I like him. He's a good actor, and he likes to ruffle some feathers. I find him fascinating. And he has this quote, and what makes it so interesting is that if you see him on screen, he usually does comedies. A lot of people say that he kind of redefined physical comedy. He was known as the man with the rubber face because he could do all these weird expressions. In fact, as I'm explaining this, you're probably thinking of a scene in a movie where he did that. He's known as being like crazy and over the top. And yet in his own personal life, he's struggled deeply with depression. And in an interview, he says this. He says, I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer. So many of us are searching for happiness. And we're constantly trying to find the door or the opportunity or the gate that's going to get us there. But the truth is, none of it's going to. You know, Pastor Dan and I were talking the other day, and he used this phrase, and it just stuck with me. He said, happiness is always a byproduct. That if you're trying to go through a door to get to happiness, you're never going to actually get it. You might think you get it, but then it's going to disappear. It's temporal. He says it's always a byproduct of us seeking out our calling and doing what God has for us. That when we go through that door, take that opportunity, that gate, that's when we get happiness. And that only happens when we go through the correct gate. I like a couple different times here. He talks about the robbers who go in through other ways. They try to get to the sheep through other ways than the gate. And whenever somebody does that, it always looks a little suspicious, a little shady. For example, you're walking down your street. You see your neighbor going into their backyard through the gate. You don't think a single thing about it. It's totally normal. You keep walking. You're walking down the street. You see your neighbor going into their backyard over the top of the fence, and all of a sudden you want to know what's going on, because that's not normal. That's not right. I remember this one time, back when I had my Ford Escort, living in Chicago. I ended up in this situation where in this really tight parking garage, I got parked in to the point that I couldn't open either my driver's side door or my passenger door enough to get me and my bag in the car. And so I had to go through the trunk. Seats fold down, you climb in, you can back out and leave. Do you know how suspicious, how shady it looks to get into your own car through the trunk? And Jesus says that's what the world is trying to do. It's trying to get to the sheep through ways other than the gate. And then Jesus comes along and he says, I am the gate. You know, I almost titled this sermon, The Dumbest Sermon You'll Ever Hear. And let me explain why. I love nuance. I love diving into the gray areas and debating. I love it with politics. I love it with theology. I absolutely love wrestling with the big, difficult questions of the faith. When did it all begin? Why is there evil in the world? What is sin? What is the nature of God? Is Jesus God? How do you explain the Trinity? All of these things. Things that there have been volume after volume, book after book written about. I absolutely love diving into those things. One of my favorite things to do is to sit down with a few other friends, grab a rum and Coke. For my Baptist friends, I just grab a Coke. I don't even know why I said rum. But to grab that and to sit down and just to dive in, to spend hours debating these theological concepts. I love that. Or I love when I can come here and preach to you guys and present some new profound idea to you that causes you to see the faith, to see God in a new way. You know, several weeks ago, we were doing this series on Leviticus, and I got to teach you guys about Leviticus 18 and give a new way of understanding it. And I got all this feedback of people who were like, I never thought of it like that. And that was such a rush for me. I love when God lets me do that. That is not this week. I do not have some insanely nuanced, profound thing to give you that is going to rock your world. No, and instead I have, it's like this story of this pastor. And he's doing a children's sermon. He calls all the kids up. They're sitting at his feet. He asked him the question. He says, hey, what is small and furry and eats acorns and climbs trees? And one of the kids raises his hand. And the pastor calls on him. And the kid says, I want to say a squirrel, but I know the answer is Jesus. It's always Jesus. Yeah, he had been there and gone through enough children's sermons to know that the answer is always Jesus. And this morning, the answer is Jesus. If you want to know where the journey to happiness, where the journey to a rich and satisfying life, an abundant life, a full life, an epic life, a God-quality life, peace with God, harmony with the Lord, oneness with your Creator. If you want to know where all of that begins, if you want to know where the journey begins, where you're going to finally feel a sense of fulfillment, of purpose in life, like real, deep, meaningful purpose, so much so that you would describe it like Jesus says as salvation. If you want to know where that begins, it's Jesus. That's the door. That's the opportunity. That's the gate you go through to get there. It's Jesus. You know, we'll learn about how he's our shepherd and how he guides us through that journey next week. But that journey, the beginning, simply Jesus. And for some of us, that's almost too simple. Like we really struggle with that. Like it doesn't seem like it should just be that Jesus. And so we often want to do this like thing where we like Jesus plus something else. Like it's Jesus plus a certain knowledge of the Bible. It's Jesus plus a certain spiritual practice. It's Jesus plus attending church or tithing to church or doing this or doing that. It's Jesus plus something else. And well, none of those things are bad, not at all. It begins just with Jesus. You know, sometimes we even want to do that with the Bible. I saw a tweet this past week. It said, we don't follow the Bible. We read the Bible to follow Jesus. It begins with Jesus. That's what I have for us this week. That as we go through this journey to find epic God-quality life, which I hope you want, salvation, which I hope you want, real happiness, which I hope you want, all of that begins with Jesus. It's that simple. It's that dumb. It's just Jesus. So my prayer is that as we finish today's service, as we listen to one more song together, that we just focus on Jesus. We just try to give it to Jesus. We try to go through that gate, that door, that opportunity. Stop trying the other things. And Jesus. Just Jesus. Thanks for joining us this morning.